The latest proposal gets a rare thumbs up, but the timetable for moving it forward gets a thumbs down. With the deal in disarray, could the UK be headed for another snap election? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Boris Johnson's stalled Brexit bill. If it's hard to follow how the UK found itself in this current mess, here's a quick history lesson. Despite French efforts to stop it happening, the UK was finally admitted to the forerunner to the European Union in 1973, beginning a rocky relationship that's lasted nearly half a century. Fast forward to 2016, and amid a wave of anti-Europe sentiment, Britain's voted to leave the EU. Since then, Brexit has passed through the hands of two other prime ministers, has been rewritten, rejected and delayed, spawned protests and caused the pound to tumble. But on Tuesday, for the first time ever, Parliament voted in favour of a proposed exit deal, but then turned around and voted no to passing it within 3 days. The EU says the saga is a waste of time and energy, but may still give Britain until the end of January to sort themselves out. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is now threatening to call a snap election before Christmas. It's all a lot to take in, I know. So let's go through this step by step before we start the debate and listen to Imogen Kimber.
One step forward for Boris's Brexit bill, but he's left standing still over the timetable.
And we now face further uncertainty, and the EU must now make up their minds over how to answer Parliament's request for a delay. And the first consequence, Mr. Speaker, is that the government must take the only responsible course and accelerate our preparations for a no-deal outcome.
A dramatic few weeks saw British Prime Minister Boris Johnson jetting from Ireland to Brussels to London, trying to negotiate the deal that would see Britain exit the EU after 3 long years, and all by the now infamous deadline of October 31st. But the simple yes or no vote on the deal that he wanted didn't happen. Instead, MPs voted for the deal to become legislation that would need to be approved by the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
So the ayes have it, the ayes have it.
With the deadline looming and no deal agreed upon, Johnson had to ask the EU for an extension, something he said he'd rather be dead in a ditch than do. Johnson tried to pass his deal again on Monday, but the Speaker of the House ruled against the vote.
For our future friendship.
In summary, today's motion is in substance the same as Saturday's motion, and the House has decided the matter. Today's circumstances are in substance the same as Saturday's circumstances. My ruling is therefore that the motion will not be debated today, as it would be repetitive and disorderly to do so.
Third time lucky, on Tuesday, Johnson put forward the deal as the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Lawmaking is usually a lengthy process, but with the deadline looming, the Prime Minister wanted it passed in a matter of days, rather than weeks.
17 hours isn't very much to deal with 40 clauses and 110 pages of this legislation. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is trying to blindside this Parliament to force this deal through, and this Parliament must challenge him in doing that.
Just 14 MPs stood between Boris and Brexit when the 3-day timetable was rejected, 322 votes to 308. Now it looks unlikely that Johnson's Withdrawal Agreement Bill can be passed by Parliament in time to meet the October 31st deadline.
So the noes have it, the noes have it.
That might mean another extension, so that MPs can take their time to scrutinise and potentially amend the legislation. Now, EU leaders will determine whether to grant the UK another delay. European leaders who appear to be running out of patience.
It's now up to the British Parliament to say what it thinks about it. It's no longer up to the European Union, which has already said things. We therefore need a vote on the substance and not delaying tactics to save time. And I believe that the President of the Republic has been relatively clear on this matter. An additional delay is in no one's interest.
And if the EU doesn't approve a delay, then the UK could still crash out without a deal. Imogen Kimber, The Newsmakers.
Well, to talk more about the possibility of the UK crashing out, let's go to Strasbourg and speak with John Howarth, a Labour member of the European Parliament for South East England. In Windsor, we have Andre Walker, a Conservative commentator and journalist covering British politics. And in London is former British diplomat Ian Bond. He's currently the Director of Foreign Policy at the Centre for European Reform. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. John Howarth, was Parliament correct in rejecting the second vote because the timetable was just 3 days?
Well, first of all, the people who voted for the first vote to approve the second reading of the bill, many of those people would vote for amendments during the next stage of the bill, but to get there, they have to approve the second reading. But on a very constrained timetable of 3 days, and we've spent more time considering the Circus Animals Act than was proposed to consider the British exit from the European Union. It would have been very difficult for MPs to exercise proper scrutiny. When Britain joined the European Union, the debate over that bill took 30 days. Now, I'm not suggesting it needs to take as long as that, but it certainly needs to take longer than most people spend deciding which sofa to buy for the house.
Right. Well, according to some people, the Circus Animals Act and Brexit is almost the same thing because it's been such a fast for almost 3 years. Andre Walker, the Daily Telegraph, saying defeat was snatched from the jaws of victory in 15 minutes. Do you believe that those MPs let Boris Johnson down?
Well, I mean, it's for MPs to do whatever they want to do. Always remember that the withdrawal from the European Union has been debated over the past 3 years for a total of 500 hours. This particular bill is substantially similar to the Theresa May one, except it doesn't have the disastrous backstop, which would force us to remain under the control of the EU as effectively a colony for as long as they wanted us to. My view on it is really very simple. This is almost like the Rump Parliament at the end of the English Civil War. These politicians are totally out of step with the British public. Never in the field of British history have so few stymied the desires of so many. But that is what is happening. It is now Parliament versus the people. And what they've done by this disastrous Fixed-Term Parliament Act, which, remember, was put through by Oliver Letwin himself when he was in government, is to create effectively a zombie government. And that is a government that cannot do anything of any substance, but at the same time, we're not allowed a general election either. And the reason we're not allowed a general election is really very simple. Labour members of Parliament have been back to their constituencies. They know how badly they're polling. They know how likely they are to get re-elected. You have ultra-safe seats like Wigan and Lee that look like they're going to be lost to the Brexit party. And so there is this insistence on continuing. But always remember the most important thing of all of this. First, we got told that we didn't understand what we were voting for. Next, we got told that the referendum was rigged. Now we're being told that there's not enough time to debate it 3 years after and 500 hours after they began debating it. The truth of the matter is we've been kept in the European Union against our wishes for far too long, and the game here is for us to hopefully give up on Brexit.
Ian Bond, can you hear Ian Bond? Okay, we seem to have an audio issue with Ian Bond, so we're going to try and reconnect with him in the next minute or so. And thanks, I thank him for letting us know, because I think he said I don't have sound there. Let's go back to John Howarth. Is Andre Walker exaggerating, John?
Well, it's the sort of thing we hear from Brexiteers. The reality of the situation is that there was a close vote in 2016 between Remain and Leave, 52 to 48. And that was followed by a general election in which Theresa May's proposition for a hard Brexit was rejected. and a government without a majority was elected. What should have happened at that point was an attempt to bring the country together. Instead, Theresa May trimmed to the extremes. And when you look at what people voted for, the future of the withdrawal from the European Union was always a matter that was left to Parliament. And Parliament hasn't been able to agree. Parliament in the UK, not at Strasbourg, has not been able to agree what Brexit actually meant.
Parliament has been able to agree.
Parliament has not been able to agree.
Parliament has agreed that it should be Brexit in name only. That what we should do is we should give as little of leaving the EU to the United Kingdom as possible while still keeping our political careers.
Okay.
That is the Brexit that they want. That's why we need a general election to eradicate these people.
Listen, Ian Bond's audio is up to speed, thankfully. Ian Bond, with just over a week to go until that October the 31st deadline, how are you feeling? Are you worried?
I am worried because we still don't have a clear path forward at the moment. And I'm afraid that what Boris Johnson has done is to create a bigger crisis by pausing the progress of this bill. I mean, it is ridiculous to think that something as substantive as this could be considered in 3 days or under 3 days. So it would have been perfectly reasonable for the government and the opposition to agree on a longer timetable, and that would have allowed for proper consideration of this bill. That's what Parliament is there for. It's there to scrutinise what the government does and to make the necessary amendments. And I'm afraid I can't agree with Andre Walker's characterisation. The 500 hours or whatever it might be of general debate is nothing like the scrutiny of detailed legal text that is now required. You've got law professors who spend their whole lives studying EU and UK law, sitting with various laws and draft laws open on the tables in front of them, trying to work out how the new language that's been introduced in the withdrawal agreement bill interacts with previously passed law. And you can't expect that MPs will be able to do that overnight and then take a reasoned decision on that. So I am concerned that the government is creating a crisis and making the risks greater.
Andre Walker, tell me why you object.
Yeah, we all know the real reason for the delay. The real reason for the delay is to make it easier to prevent Brexit altogether. And there are two ways of doing that. First is to keep Britain in the customs union, which effectively makes it a colony of the European Union. And the second way is to have what they call a confirmatory referendum. And what will happen in the confirmatory referendum is this. There will be three options. There will be Boris Johnson's deal, there will be no deal, and there will be Remain. So effectively, what they attempt to do is split the vote so Remain can sail through the middle. And then what they'll attempt to do is forget about Brexit altogether. Both those options are wholly unacceptable, because what these two guys to the side of me don't realise is you cannot rule a country without consent. And at the moment, there is no consent to be ruled by the European Union. So when they attempt to stymie Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, which is exactly what they do, and when they attempt to keep this going, they want to be talking about this in 10, 15 years' time. They don't want us to leave the European Union. And I think the dishonesty in the House of Commons actually is quite shameful.
Okay. John Howarth, do you want to be talking about this in 10, 15 years' time?
Well, you see, the tragedy is that if we leave the European Union on the terms, on whatever terms, and certainly the terms that are defined in Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement, which is worse than Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, we will be talking about a future relationship with the European Union for many, many years. And the sort of very inflammatory ranting that we've heard is the sort of thing that I believe will condemn the country to division for a very long time. Brexit will not end whenever we leave, because all it will do, sadly, is commence the next series of negotiations on how we construct a relationship with our nearest partner, our ally over 40-odd years, in the Western world and our major trading partner. These are relationships with our friends, and the kind of inflammatory language we've had from Number 10, from the Leave campaign, and from commentators like Mr. Walker is very, very dangerous.
Ian Bond.
Well, we need to be...
All right.
Well, allow me to respond.
Okay. Briefly, please, Andre, because I want to bring in what the Europeans are saying. Briefly, please, Andre.
Look, we've just got to be honest. You know, we are outvoted and we are controlled by an undemocratic European government, whether they're our allies or not. I like the United States of America. I don't wish to be ruled by Donald Trump.
Okay. Ian Bond, the Germans saying they won't block an extension. We heard Donald Tusk, the European Council president, saying he's okay with a 3-month delay to negotiations and so on. Are the Europeans being flexible beyond what Britain deserves right now, or are the Europeans playing it cool? What are they doing? Help me understand their tactic right now.
Well, I think the Europeans, on one level, are quite frustrated with the chaos in the UK. But on another level, they have no interest in pushing us into a no-deal Brexit that, while it would be catastrophic for the UK, certainly wouldn't be very good for the rest of Europe either. And I have to say that it is total nonsense to suggest that had we gone down the route of a customs union, as was suggested in Theresa May's deal, that would have made us a colony. I mean, ask Turkey whether it's a colony of the EU. It seems to be a remarkably independent country. So, you know, I agree with John Howarth. There's some inflammatory language being used which has very little relationship to reality.
Right.
But I think basically the rest of Europe would like us to sort ourselves out. Donald Tusk has made clear repeatedly that he would be very happy if we changed our minds. He sees this as a tragedy for Europe that we're leaving. From my point of view, 21 of these countries will still be our NATO allies whether we leave the EU or not. And we still need to have very good, very close relationships with them. And we should not be burning any bridges.
Right. Okay, John Howarth, before we say goodbye to you, do you fear a general election as much as Andre Walker says you do?
No, I don't. And I think an election will happen soon enough. But what I don't believe any of the opposition parties, including those who in the current opinion polls stand to do better in a general election, are going to do is trust Boris Johnson on his threats to crash the United Kingdom out of the European Union on a no-deal Brexit that would be damaging on both sides of the Channel, but particularly most damaging for the areas which most voted to leave the European Union. It is, by the way, you know, and France has been posited as the country that's most sceptical about extending Britain's tenure in the European Union. France, of course, being Britain's nearest neighbour, would be one of the big losers from a no-deal Brexit. So France really has no interest in that, but everybody has domestic politics. No, there'll be an election soon enough, and we'll see where that leads. But what is very important here is that we, at some stage, start bringing the country together. And I think that the Labour Party's policy of taking the outcome of this back to the people is the right outcome. And it is wrong for Andrew Walker to categorise what might be on the ballot paper, because he says he knows that, but in reality, he doesn't know that any more than I or the rest of us. And it is terribly unhelpful. Democracy did not end in the United Kingdom in June 2016.
Okay, John Howarth, this is where we Brexit you from the debate. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. Let's bring in Denis MacShane into the debate now. He was the Minister of State for Europe in the Labour government between 2002 and 2005, and he's just published his latest book, Brexiternity, The Uncertain Fate of Britain. Denis, we've been having this conversation for 3.5 years. Brexit negotiations between Britain and the EU, it's becoming a British tradition now, isn't it? Does it look like it's ever going to end anytime soon?
Well, here's my book, if I hold it up, Brexiternity. I invented the word, so it's first for TRT. It's just going out into the bookshops today. I saw a wonderful cartoon on WhatsApp, and it's two old ladies sitting there, you know, with their cup of tea, aged 80, and she says, "Do you remember I was young enough to have voted in the Brexit referendum and was still in the EU?" So I genuinely don't know. I'm baffled because there were 52 million voting age British citizens in June 2016. 17.4 million of them voted to leave the EU. Clear decision, but 34.6 million didn't. So 1/3 of the voting age population voted out, 2/3 didn't. And I would have thought it was incumbent on Mrs May to try and bring the country together. I mean, other people may want the most brutal amputational Brexit imaginable. Most of us just want a rational, reasonable way forward. But we've not had, from either Mrs May and certainly not now from Mr Johnson, anything but bluster and threats and throwing toys out of the pram.
OK, so Andre Walker, the reason that this hasn't happened thus far is because you guys want a brutal amputation. You don't want this to be finessed nicely and easily. You want to impoverish the country. That's why there's the delay. It's your fault, not their fault.
It's sad, really, the level of dishonesty, because if you think about it, I used to work at the European Parliament, and if you go to places like France or Germany, then they will tell you that there is going to be a federal Europe, and they're very happy about it. In Britain, we have always been lied to. Everything that we ever get told about, everything we ever suggest about the European Union is always a crazed conspiracy theory. I remember Nigel Farage debating Nick Clegg, and Nick Clegg describes the European army as a dangerous fantasy, and then 18 months later, it's happening. I just think, you know, pro-Europeans need to be honest about this. They don't respect democracy. They don't respect the referendum result. They want to create a federal Europe. They want us to be a state in a country called Europe. Now, there are arguments in favour of creating a country called Europe, and no doubt Denis can lay them out to you. But what is unfair is when we continually lie about these things. And I think what is bad at the moment is when we look at the Brexit debate. Fundamentally, the House of Commons is trying to prevent Brexit by any method that it can. The House of Lords is even worse. And we just aren't going to be honest about that at all.
Denis MacShane?
I'm sorry. I mean, this liar, pants on fire, accusing everybody of being a liar, of being dishonest. Well, OK, that might work after a couple of gin and tonics in the golf club bar, but it's not grown up politics. These are huge constitutional decisions. They impact on nearly 2 million British citizens.
Hang on a second. No, they're not.
Well,
You've said they're not.
Andrew, forgive me. All right, Andrew, if you want, I can talk over you. Believe me, I'm much more experienced than you. I've been a BBC producer. I know how to talk over somebody like you who's rude and interrupts all the time. So just for a second, listen. You've been talking over everybody else. And the plain fact is that we're altering fundamentally how we govern ourselves. Boris Johnson is saying that firms in Northern Ireland have to fill in export declaration forms if they want to send goods to mainland Britain. It's like filling in an export form to send something from Scotland to England. This is an extraordinary decision that's pushing Northern Ireland. I'm not a fan of the DUP, but I've got Irish family. This is pushing Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom. That in itself is worthy of a huge national debate, without talking about our fellow citizens in Europe, without talking about Nissan and Airbus and Honda and Toyota, who won't be able to stay in the UK if the Boris Johnson hard Brexit takes place. Let's have a rational debate. And what's just astonishing is the Commons could have been debating this today, Wednesday. But Mr Johnson just, as I say, went into a hissy fit and said, we're not going to have the debate. You can't debate it. I'm in charge. You have to listen and obey.
I want to ask Ian Bond here, because we have Remainers, Ian, especially young Remainers, who feel that they weren't a part of the process. They want a second referendum. A lot of them are very angry about Brexit. And then you have people like Nigel Farage saying, do or die is over. We have now moved on to dying in a ditch. We will not be leaving the EU on 31st of October. Has the society become more radicalized because of everything that happened over the past 3 years?
Yes, I think it has become much more polarised. I mean, all of the recent opinion polls show that there is now a majority in favour of remaining, but it's not much wider than the majority was in favour of leaving in 2016. We are still a deeply divided state. I must say I absolutely agree with Denis MacShane about the Northern Ireland question. I find it absolutely extraordinary that a party that calls itself the Conservative and Unionist Party is just casually throwing up borders between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom in a way that seems to me almost guaranteed to speed up the process of the breakup of the UK.
Okay.
I think it's a catastrophic decision.
Right. Okay. Listen, Ian, Dennis, and Andre, I've got to move on. But let's have this conversation again because Brexit's not going away anytime soon. I thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of The Newsmakers. Andre Walker, Ian Bond, Denis MacShane, and earlier John Howarth. Thanks again. Bye-bye.